How's everybody out there today, right now, huh? Good? Want to kind of just stretch, do this kind of thing. There we go. I think I was telling a story about Mexican Mennonite drug traffickers or something like that, right? That really happened to me, by the way. I was in Chihuahua, Mexico, and there's a whole colony of Mennonites who are just like 20 years removed from the horse and buggy. And they're all, well, a lot of them are drug traffickers. And I try to go down there and do the big narco-Mennonite story. Very intrepid reporter. And, I mean, have you ever been followed, like, in a car? Like in the detective movie, you know? I mean, like, followed by somebody. I was like, you know, I used to watch, like, the Rockford Files and all those things, you know, and I was trying to outwit them. You know, I had a little gold Chevy Love about the size of those two chairs right there. And I've never been followed. I was the scaredest I've ever been. And it was surreal because these guys were Mennonites who spoke this funky German and lived in northern Mexico and were all connected up with the Juarez drug cartel. And I thought, sure, they were going to murder me. And for 2 months after that, this is also true, for 2 months after that, I had a serious phobia about tall, blonde-haired men. I thought they were going to all, you know, every time I saw them, I was like, you know. Anyway, okay, let me just continue on here if you guys don't mind. I hope she's okay. That was John Lorenzo's wife, and John was very helpful in particularly in finding out more about Dreamland. I'm sorry this happened to her. I think she's going to be okay. It looks like she just fainted. Anyway, it was on the third visit to this town that I began to hear of this recovery community that was then emerging in towns. More and more people turning away from dope. I met them, particularly at this clubhouse. I heard hair-raising stories of addiction, and I heard their equally impressive, frankly, stories of redemption and recovery. And meanwhile, as I listened, a kind of a vision in my mind formed. It was kind of hazy and vague, but it took shape of Portsmouth, a lot like a boxer on the mat, beaten and bruised, but refusing to stay down. And I have to tell you, I am an underdog for a sports story. I've seen Rudy like 9 times. You know that movie about that kid from Notre Dame? And every time he sacks the quarterback at the end, I'm like, oh, God. Oh, my God. I cry about quarterback sacks, I guess. I'm a real red-blooded American man. I don't know. I realized, though, that pharmaceutical, as I got into this and began to do reporting elsewhere, I began to realize that it wasn't just pharmaceutical advertising and promotion that got us to this point. And I realized, too, that this was not just a book about crime, a book about dope, which is what I thought I was writing when I began. It was as much about the country and what we had become as Americans, it seemed to me. It seemed to me that we had spent 35 years destroying community in this country, mocking and clawing, again, at the girdings of government that provide the public assets and infrastructure that we take for granted and that make communal life possible. Meanwhile, we exalted the private sector. We beat communism and came to believe that the free market was some kind of infallible God. Accepting this economic dogma, so to speak, we even encouraged jobs to go overseas. We rewarded our priests of finance for pushing those jobs offshore, thereby just crushing communities. Our unions, too, behaved as if foreign competition was impossible, would never come. When pills arrived, it was part of an era, I believe, where we believed that the old rules, we had beaten communism, and the old rules didn't apply to us. You remember this was a time when we began to believe that 4 or 5 home run hitters every year could hit more than 60 home runs, even though it had never happened more than twice in the history of the sport. We believed that all these these bad mortgages that were just awful mortgages could be bundled into one security. Standard & Poor's could deem them AAA, and then all of a sudden that would magically transform them into magnificent securities to buy. And we believed that opiates prescribed in mass quantities to mass numbers of people would have no risk whatsoever. We demanded perfection from government and gave the private sector forgave the private sector its trespasses. Government is the problem, one president said. Well, this is a story of the private sector run amok. As I said, all the people I was talking to early on in this book were government employees. They were the thin line between us and complete mayhem. Profits, meanwhile, in this story remained private, all in the hands of pharmaceutical companies mostly, and the cost of dealing with the collateral damage fell to the public sector. It was, in my opinion, a kind of an extreme form of corporate welfare. The Sackler family that owns Purdue Pharma is now one of America's wealthiest families with an estimated net worth, according to Forbes, of $14 billion. This one family that owns Purdue Pharma, due entirely to $35 billion in sales of OxyContin since the drug came out in '96. We began to also, at the same time as we exalted the private sector, we began to have a fear of the public sphere, of being outside. Parents hovered over their kids, afraid they'd feel pain, afraid that they'd fail, keeping them from the consequences of their failure. People just did not go outside. I remember when I was growing up in Southern California, my mom was from Iowa. She had a farm bell, and every night we'd be out playing. What do you do in Southern California? I said, go outside, for God's sakes. And she'd ring the bell at 6 p.m., and my brothers and I would all run back home for dinner. I've been back to that street several times since returning from Mexico, which is not about 30 miles from where I live, and I have literally yet to see one human being on the street, where at 4 o'clock when I was growing up, you could see kids all up and down that street riding bikes. The Atlantic Monthly ran a story a little while ago talking about kids who grew up in an era of hyper-protection from physical pain were now demanding to be protected from painful ideas. They were demanding professors in college provide trigger warnings in advance of ideas that might provoke a strong emotional content. My God, that's why you go to college. And you students at this school ask for a trigger warning. It's time to find a job at McDonald's. No, kidding. Psychology Today ran a story called The Declining Student Resilience that noticed an increased neediness in college students, that students had called campus police after seeing a mouse, blaming teachers for poor grades, and, quote, increasingly seeking help for and apparently having emotional crises over problems of everyday life. As a country, seems to me, meanwhile, we acted as if consumption and the accumulation of stuff was the path to happiness. We built into our suburbs an isolation, a loneliness, and called it prosperity. Added to that mix was the expansion of technology that connects us, makes us friends with people across the country, but separates us and makes us ignorant of our next-door neighbors. We pretend we're informed by 24-hour cable news, which are, in my opinion, are dealers in the drug of outrage. They provide little information, little education. Mostly it's heat, alarm, frenzy, and isolation that separate us from each other and envelop us in a luxurious warmth, seems to me, of outrage that feels so good but teaches us almost nothing. 24-hour news, in my opinion, is just like heroin. Just as addicts, you know, addicts, they all kind of group together and confab in their separate little world, talking with and spending time with no one who isn't like them. So 24-hour news has done the same to us, molding us into little like bubbles, people who talk to only those who believe as they do. I just, by the way, I'm very proud, actually, to have turned down my first CNN interview. I've done CNN interviews 6 times to talk mostly about Mexican drug trafficking, and each time it's 6 minutes talking with a guy in New York or Atlanta who doesn't know a thing about the topic, with 2 other guests, and it is a complete waste of time, and I'm forced to answer questions like, Sam, what should we do? And I'm like, I'm a reporter, I don't know what she would do, and if I knew the answer, it would certainly take a lot more than 20 seconds. So they called me again, the same format, and I said, hell no. It seemed to me that over years we wound up dangerously separate as a country, dangerously separate from each other, whether in poverty or in affluence. We wound up, in fact, it seemed to me, just like Portsmouth after Dreamland closed. No place to come together. Kids no longer play in the street across America. Parks are underused in my hometown. Dreamland out there lies buried under a strip mall, and why then do we wonder that heroin is everywhere? Our very search for painlessness led us to it. Heroin is what we get when we destroy things that bring us together, like Dreamland. And we did that one way or another all across this country, in my opinion. Heroin is the final expression of values that we have fostered for 35 years in this country. Heroin turns every addict into a narcissistic, self-absorbed, solitary hyper-consumer for whom buying stuff is the sole point of life. Heroin is the final stuff, if you like, for a culture that acts as if stuff leads to happiness. A life that finds opiates turns away from family and community and devotes itself entirely to self-gratification by buying and consuming one product, and that product is the drug that most makes being alone not just all right, but preferable. Every addict uses his private bedroom that his mother preferred him to be in or her to be in, instead of outside playing in the street. And it's in those private bedrooms where kids all across America are hiding their dope, using their dope, nodding off, and dying. Isolation is heroin's natural habitat. I believe more strongly than ever that the antidote to heroin isn't naloxone, it is community. If you want to keep kids off of heroin, make sure people in your community, in your neighborhood, do things together, in public, and often. Break down those barriers that keep people isolated. Create your own dreamland on your block. My last few visits to Portsmouth, frankly, are a bit of a blur. I can't remember what I found, when, and how many visits, and I know I did 5 or 6 or something like that. I want to say that it was the pill mill story that brought me to Portsmouth the first time. But I kept coming back because I thought I had found that story of hope and of recovery that the book needed. I was stunned, though, that I found it in Portsmouth. I spent a lot more time at that clubhouse. I went to a recovery picnic out there in the forest somewhere. I went to AA meetings. Along the way, Dr. Proctor got out of prison, was deported to Canada, excuse me, and called me and wrote to me and said now he was more than willing to grant me that interview that I had always wanted for a fee. And I said, Doc, I love you, but I can't do it. At some point, too, I was sent the link to a song by a local rap group called RWR, What the Hell You Know About the 740, one of the great songs I have heard in a long time. I realized again why the 3 most American letters of the English alphabet are DIY, do it yourself. RWR didn't wait for a record company to anoint them and give them a record contract. They just wrote the song, recorded it, and filmed that really disturbing but cool video on iPhones. It was an electric piece, and great, and I say disturbing, but an anthem kind of coming out of modern rural America. RWR's production reminded me of the way folks from Portsmouth had banded together to save Mitchell Lake, had said enough of this idea that we're nothing because Wall Street says we're a financial service country now and all those manufacturing jobs need to just head off to Malaysia or Mexico or somewhere. That self-reliance that I thought I saw being cultivated in Portsmouth again reminded me that this opiate epidemic is essentially un-American. By then I had come to believe that the epidemic was rooted really in our turning away from who and what we are at our best. Our American ideal is about self-reliance, about determining our own lives, about control of our own lives. Opiate addiction, of course, is the opposite. Addicts relinquish free will, enslaved to a pursuit of a product and pursuit of painlessness. This story is also about believing we can do it all alone, strangely. It's about the agony that results from the pursuit of painlessness. And it's about how community is essential to our nature. Self-reliance and community are kind of two essential parts to our nature. People said President said government is the problem. Government does have some problems. I'm a reporter. I've seen it pretty up close at times in my career. But to say that is an extreme statement that creates the belief that we can function as loners. To talk about government as though it is separate from us, it is not ours, is really scornful of the idea that we can come together to solve our problems in community, which is what government does. It's also an extreme statement. It's saying government is the problem is like saying that going from saying opiates are good for pain to saying that pills are good for all pain and all people and in massive unlimited dosages, which is what we've been saying over the last 20 years. When it came to kind of think of what kind of solutions might be required by this whole ordeal, it seemed to me that taking accountability for our health in a variety of ways was essential. I know it's hard. So much works against that. Advertising, the availability of food and everything else. Community is hard. It's easier to keep alone in our houses, inventing reasons why it's dangerous to be outside. Recovery is hard. It's easier to be inventing reasons why isolation is better. And it's for this reason that I love the story of Portsmouth, Ohio. The more I visited, the more I realized that initial appearances were very deceiving. The more I dug down into the town, the more I found a core story that was not demoralizing and fatalistic, but instead energizing, optimistic. The town, it occurred to me, was turning away from dependency, away from believing what others said about it must be true, and was coming to rely on itself in a beautiful and very American way. In the last visits I had, Lisa Roberts told me the story of the marches from this. Who took my sweat? Where did I put my beautiful T-shirt? Anyway, I'll find it. From the led by churches through various neighborhoods, exorcising those evil pill mills. In 2011, Ohio passed a law co-authored by Terry Johnson regulating pill mills. And when all those things closed down, mercifully left, it seemed like a breath of fresh air had entered the town. There's that great story of the march that ends with the double rainbow going over the town as if like being blessed, finally being purged of this like devilish, diabolical force in the town. What started with the saving of Mitchell Ace, now Soul Choice, became part of the culture, it would seem to me increasingly. People doing things for themselves, like that rap video. Some of this, I felt, is what the country ought to take note of. At the time, people were beginning to ask my opinion of what should be done regarding widespread opiate addiction. It seemed to me, I said, that Portsmouth, off down in the southern end of Ohio, right on the Ohio River, was rebuilding community that it had lost. There was a cafe downtown where people could meet and be outside. Probably the first such thing since Dreamland was closed. People were filling in and remodeling and finding new uses for some of the old empty buildings, and there were lofts downtown. Health clubs were opening. In one of the most important moves, I thought, as a reporter, the city council wisely hired a city manager. Instead of having the mayor run the town and without knowing a thing about how to run the town nor having the time to do it, now you had a professional who could attend to the details, and people finally figured out at what time the trash was going to be picked up in Portsmouth, Ohio. Here at this school, Professor Scott Dalthus, students devised a solution such as put a light in the park where all the hookers are at night. Pretty easy. Basic things. It was like Municipal 101, but in the downturn, the departure of jobs and Main Street and Dreamland, the rise of basically an improvised city government, all of that, all of those basic solutions were tangled up and shouted down in recalls and finger-pointing and fatalism. There was one of the first needle exchanges in all of Ohio started here, and that meant that the rates of Hep C dropped. Employers, it seemed to me, across the county were now learning to say yes when a felon or a recovering addict came in for jobs. Bob Evans and Vinylcraft, I interviewed those folks, began hiring felons and recovering addicts, providing them, if not the greatest job in the world, at least something to get started. By my last visit, 10% of the town, I was told, was in recovery for opiate addiction. Now that's a startling, maybe harrowing statistic, but it is also remarkably exhilarating to think you have so many people of the town now forming a counterculture to the let's get high all the time and steal the copper wire from the school district culture that existed when the OxyContin economy ruled this town. The counseling center was growing, expanding enormously, filling in a lot of those buildings, and receiving folks from all over Ohio. That's an amazing thing. People were coming. By my last visit, I met people who had come to Portsmouth to get clean. This added, in my opinion, an energy to the town that seemed to really, really need it. I learned, as I did this interviewing, that recovering addicts aren't just people who no longer use. They are also re-energized, bring a whole new kind of dynamism, willingness to work, and above all, they are enormously grateful. My friend Missy Fisher said on Facebook recently, feeling blessed to be given a second chance. It's great. How many of you guys feel blessed to be given a second chance? Yeah. There were NA meetings, AA meetings all over town at many times during the day, every day. A recovery culture was growing in Portsmouth that I began to see on those last couple visits, which is why I kept coming back to the town. The school, this one right here, now has recovering addicts studying to be drug counselors, hoping to add to that community. That is such an exciting thing. I say all this, and I know that things are not perfect. Much needs to be done. Heroin is a serious problem here, as is fentanyl. So, by the way, is the lack of jobs that lead somewhere. But the new attitude, really an old American attitude that we got away from as a country, and maybe people got away from here as well, is the essential first step. As I wrote, it occurred to me that the way Portsmouth is showing accountability for its social, economic, and municipal health is what Americans now have to do for their communities and their own bodies. We need to question the drugs that are marketed to us. We need to demand the government stop allowing pharma ads on TV all the time. We need to depend less on pills as solutions, demand our grocers stock better food, work out, get exercise together, and stop demanding doctors magically fix us. It will then, I bet, matter far less what new product a drug company devises, and we'll be happy to ignore it. I end the book this way, talking about Portsmouth. So the battered old town had hung on. It was somehow a beacon, embracing shivering and hollowed-eyed junkies, letting them know that all was not lost, that at the bottom of the rubble was a place just like them, kicked and buried, but surviving. A place that had, like them, shredded and lost so much that was precious, but was nurturing it again. And though they were adrift, that they too could begin to find their way back to that place called Dreamland. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, it's good of you. Thank you. Thank you very much. You are too kind. Thank you very, very, very much. I wish my wife and daughter were here to see this, honest to God. I think we're going to invite the man who got me introduced to all this in the first place, Ed Hughes, up, and we're going to have a little chat.
So Zach is on that side of the room. I'll be on this side of the room with the microphone. So if you have a question to pose to these two gentlemen, just raise your hand and we'll get the microphone to you.
Can you hear this? Is that okay? Okay, good. Great to see you, man.
Didn't Sam do a great job?
Thank you. Part of what a reporter, particularly a reporter from out of town, a guy who doesn't know a dang thing about where he is, needs is people to open to him and show him different parts of that town. And I know that perhaps in the past the town feels like reporters have not done justice or have left by telling only one part of the story. And so this guy from California showing up out of the blue, there was no sense that I would be any different. I thought I was different, but no one else would know that. And so I really appreciate the help that got from you, the explanations, and everybody kind of putting their own little part of the puzzle of Portsmouth and its history together, because, of course, I didn't know a thing. And several of you guys are sitting here, Joanna, Kathy, Missy, Lisa, and all these folks. I mean, the folks at the clubhouse, a lot of whose names, frankly, I can't remember anymore. I talked to so many guys over there. But it seemed to me at the time, as I was talking with those guys, little by little, I was slow on the uptake, that there was something new happening, that the old fatalism, the old stuff was maybe still around even a little bit, but that there was something more, and it was an amazing realization. I began to think about it driving back and forth to Columbus a lot, and I was thinking, man, who knew that I would find that kind of story in a town where I would see abandoned buildings and hookers by the railroad tracks,
I think we
But
do.
I love the story. I want. So
I think we have a question back there. Would you stand up, please?
Methadone addiction.
You addressing that to me?
we can both answer. Why don't you go ahead?
Well, most people would not look at it as trading in another addiction. When Suboxone, buprenorphine was first brought to the market, and again, in some ways, it has followed some of the same trajectory that we have seen with some of the drugs that we've been concerned about, such as OxyContin, is that it had a limited purpose. Suboxone can be a medication that can help some addicted people to transition from OxyContin or heroin to sobriety. And the phrase that is used is medication-assisted treatment. So it needs to be used within a very robust treatment program as kind of an ancillary to that treatment. But again, what we see is that has now transitioned to where the medication is becoming the treatment, absent of perhaps any kind of real, counseling or life transformation that is required. And so the medication itself is now starting to become, the focus. And again, I think it's another pharmaceutical problem that our community is now having to deal with.
Can I say, though, that when I started the book, if I'd even had an opinion on it, which I don't think I actually did, I didn't know enough about it, but I think eventually I would have said, I don't understand the point of substituting one drug for another. But as I began to go along, I began to realize a few things had changed. One is you need to understand the new context that we're living in America. And that is that we no longer get our heroin from Turkey or Burma or Thailand. And when the heroin was coming from there mostly, it was cut and cut and cut and arrived here very weak and very difficult to find in some areas and very expensive because it had to come from so far away. Now, all our heroin comes from Mexico Don't believe this Afghanistan stuff. Afghanistan supplies Russia. Afghanistan's far, I get this all the time, Afghanistan's far too far away to compete with Mexican heroin in this country. So it's all coming from Mexico or from Colombia through Mexico, but it's all there. It's right next, it's our next door neighbors where it's coming from. So that means it's more plentiful, it's cheaper, and it's more potent than ever before. And that's what you meet. That's what greets you when you are, as a recovering addict, leave your 9 months of very expensive treatment or whatever treatment is that you find. And so, to my way of thinking, it is very, very difficult to ask people to confront that without some kind of shield, at least for a while. It's all in the way you deliver it, as Ed was saying. You can methadone can be a great tool, or it can be legalized drug trafficking. Some of these clinics I've seen are both. It can be one or the other, right? We said these opiate pain pills are great for acute pain or for dying cancer treatment when you're dying. Instead we just blasted it at the whole country. So it's all in how you administer it, regulate it, use it. But I would say that we have a very different situation now certainly with regards to heroin, and also, frankly, with regards to opiate pain pills. I know they're hard to find right now, but they are plentiful in many other parts of the country. So as addicts get out, recovering addicts get out, and are looking for a fighting chance, they're met by this tidal wave of dope. And it seems to me that in that context, that really it's kind of, you just absolutely need some kind of shield, Vivitrol, Suboxone, whatever it is, and I agree with Ed that you need it to be in part of a larger treatment plan, and that's part of the problem we have now perhaps in some parts of the country. But I do believe, I've come to believe that medically assisted treatment is really, in the new context of cheap heroin from Mexico, is almost is a dangerous thing not to have.
But to the credit of the person who's asking the question, again, those of us from our community, because again, we were at the heart of the epidemic in terms of OxyContin. I can remember going to Columbus and talking to colleagues from around the state and asking them about what are you doing about this OxyContin epidemic, and they had never heard of the drug. So we were the epicenter. Right. And right now it appears that we are also the epicenter in terms of this proliferation of Suboxone, and it's on the streets, and it's, people are purchasing it off the streets, and so there's a tremendous underground drug trade of that medication, just like there was OxyContin. So I understand very well the concerns that, our community has around that medication.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello. I don't really have a question, it's a comment. I wanted to show appreciation to you for the not demonizing the young Mexican men who are under such pressure, socioeconomic pressure to do something, who end up coming here taking these jobs. I really appreciated showing that, because there is so much xenophobia and stereotyping anyhow. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. I mean, I would say that, I wanted to describe what was happening, and I really do believe that of removing the adjectives, remove the adjectives from your writing. First of all, removing adjectives is just good writing, but it also helps people figure it out for themselves, and you read it. I would say that town, Jalisco, where I went and wrote about, that town could easily be a bunch of landscapers or a bunch of factory workers in suburban LA or something like that. It's just that town happened to stumble on this one. A few families in that town stumbled on this one system for selling heroin like pizza and took it, and they came here. I'm not here to Portsmouth, but here to Columbus, and that became their hub. But when I was starting this story, that was what got me in this whole thing. A DEA agent in Columbus said, we've got this new system here and these Mexican guys, and they're all from the same town. And when he said that, that's when that hooked me right there. I was like, okay, yeah, because I lived in Mexico for 10 years, and I had been to many communities, small villages, immigrant villages, all over all over Mexico where, in fact, everybody does the same job. And the reason for that is because there is not the access to the education school like this, for example, that would take you, a peasant farmer's son or daughter, and turn you into a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer or something like that. It's very difficult to get that kind of. So you, as a young kid, learn your life's work from people around you. And if everybody is a landscaper in Dallas, then like as not, you're going to be a landscape. If your uncle and brother-in-law, they're all landscapers in Dallas, you're going to be a landscaper in Dallas. I've seen that model repeated many times. My first book, if you go to my website, this is my name, samquinones.com. My first book is a chapter about one town where everybody makes popsicles. And they have a popsicle business model that is a beautiful story. It's a very rich story. It's a story of how, again, community allows all people to move up. And it's the wealthiest village I've been to in Mexico, where there's no poor people. There's middle class and wealthy people, but there's really no poor people, because everybody has set up these popsicle businesses all over Mexico. It's one of the most prevalent businesses you see all across. And at the entrance to the town, is an enormous two-story concrete popsicle. And you can see a picture of it on my website. There's another town where literally everybody is a pimp. It's a horrible little town where I've also been to. And they pimp these country girls that they con, and it's a disgusting place, honestly. Quite the opposite of the popsicle place. But they pimp girls to Queens, New York. And they build these, you know, if you're a pimp, like in any culture, you like have no taste, class, you're just a scuzzy guy. This town is filled with these unbelievably ugly houses. It's unbelievable how bad. One guy built himself, literally, in rural Mexico, a 4-story pagoda. There's a pagoda, looks like Thailand or something like that thing. And I saw there one time a house where every inch of the house, every gables, it looks like something out of Connecticut or something like that, every inch of it painted black. Now, who paints an entire house black? Well, a pimp, So what I'm trying to say is that there's a whole culture of one town. You learn your job from everybody else, and this town, Jalisco and Nayarit, is no different. They're just, people learned it. And my job was to describe how and why. It was not to tell you what you should think of young men who sell heroin like pizza. You could figure that one out for yourself in any way you wish.
I'm 65, and I'm trying to learn about this stuff, and the stigma is definitely here, I think, against addiction. And as you try to understand that this is about saving a human life, I think that becomes the most important thing that we can possibly do. That's the greatest gift you can give to another person. And then I can think about times when I was, young, and the risk and so forth I took. And when you talk about a second chance and the need for people to have a second chance, I think we all need to have a second chance. I argue with people about Narcan, and I hear people saying, this person had Narcan 3 times. This shouldn't be. And I try to put myself there and say, if that was my son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter on the scene, would I give him Narcan? Or if they needed methadone, would I give them methadone? And I say, yeah, I would. I just wonder how you feel about that, about life-saving with those types of drugs.
In the story of our community, when it's finally completely told, and we have somehow perhaps got on the other side of this epidemic, and it's a healthcare epidemic at this point in terms of being able to see addiction as a healthcare problem, but a group of people that will be looked back on as the real heroes within our community are the family members who have had to do some very difficult things to help their addicted loved ones. Because dealing with the addiction of your child or your grandchild or a sibling, or in some cases your parent, counterintuitive to everything we believe about helping people. And so I know firsthand that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people in our community that have been affected by drug addiction that never dreamed that they would be affected by drug addiction, whether themselves as becoming addicted or as having a loved one. And those people have had to rally around an effort to try and learn how to help their loved ones, and had to make a lot of very difficult decisions. And one of the things that they have done in our community that's been so very powerful is that they have become advocates to try to deal with the stigma that is associated with addiction. And it is because of those family members and because of Solace and other people that have been willing to step out and say, you know, I can remember Governor Kasich when he was first elected. He was here in, I think, January after he was elected. And he had a group of leaders that he brought in because he wanted to know about this problem that we had in our community. And during that meeting, I mean, he had, you know, law enforcement and judges and educators. And he said, he looked at one of the people and said, tell me about how this problem affects the business that you do. And that person answered, he said, first let me tell you about my son. And they went around that room, and everyone at that table had a personal story about how opiate addiction was affecting their loved one, their family, you know, and their neighborhood. And that was a turning point for us to be able to recognize that this is not a problem that happens to somebody else's kids. It's happening to our kids. It's happening to our family members and our neighbors. And those people, to me, are heroic because they were willing to tell that story the first time when it wasn't okay to tell that story. And again, for those of you who were in the room that are a part of that group, thank you very much because, again, you have made a difference.
Yeah, I don't have much more to say. I would like, though, to recognize that early on it must have been extraordinarily difficult for some of those parents to talk about this. And Joanna was probably only the second or third person and the first one in this area that I met who was willing to do that. I thought that was amazing. It was extraordinarily brave. I was also stunned that more people weren't willing to come. I had just imagined that if my daughter had died of such a thing, I would have been public with, but who knows? Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, it's such a lacerating thing, such a torment, such a torture. And now the book, what has happened since the book came out, I mean, I thought the book was going to basically come out, I was going to write it, and I was going to, I thought it was a nationwide, coast-to-coast story. It was big, and I thought it was something that everyone needed to know about, and I also thought the book would come out and die because nobody, I ran into that wall of silence. There, as I say, very few people. Joanna in this area, a couple more in Columbus, 3 in Columbus, and that was it. I mean, really, that was like it, you know? And I couldn't believe it because I came from, I was a crime reporter. My first job as a crime reporter was in Stockton, California during the crack epidemic, and you could not avoid parents. You would walk through a bad neighborhood and they'd be, hey, write about this. What are you guys doing? You know, this is happening to us. So it was also very public, right? It was a crack epidemic was a very public thing. Drive-by shootings, first time since Prohibition they'd use those. Carjackings, the big lines of crack dealers I saw in Stockton. It was unbelievable. It was not, you could not avoid it. It was a drug scourge, and that's what I thought drug scourges were, public. And this one was the first private one, the first one begun by doctors. Those Mexican guys I wrote about, they came late to that party, you know. This was doctors drinking that Kool-Aid that said it's okay to prescribe as much of this to as many, wisdom teeth withdrawal. I mean, that's extraction. That's ridiculous, it seems to me, to prescribe. Or it's also ridiculous to prescribe it in the quantities, you know. But as time went on, I began to realize that I was facing that this wall of silence, you know, because it was so quiet. There was no public violence. No, everyone was crying alone. This one person gave me this image. Wayne Campbell up in Columbus said, all across America, there are parents alone in their darkened bedrooms, holding photo albums and crying and terrified of telling anybody, thinking that they are the only one for 5-10 miles around that has this problem, when actually it's one street down, one street over by this, you know, everyone's everyone's got it. And so I thought that when my book came out that it would run into that wall of silence, the wall of quiet. The fact that there was no public violence meant that it could be hidden. And what has happened since then actually is the opposite, and that is very, very healthy for everybody, for the country, for a specific region, but also for those parents. People are coming out. They're joining Facebook groups. They're marching. They're calling their legislators. They're forming groups of just book groups and various other kinds of things to talk about this. And that is the first step. You know, nothing happens politically until, you know, and I know as a media person that if you can't get a parent to tell that story, the parent, the mom particularly, can tell that story so poignantly, and if that mom's going to be quiet about it, it's going to be silence, and that's what I was running into. And thankfully, in the last year, you've seen parents putting this, losing that stigma that you referred to, losing that fear, putting cause of death in the obituaries is one thing, for example. A very hard thing to do, but entirely healthy for that family, and I do believe for the country to be hearing this now. It needs to happen far more, perhaps, than it does, but it's begun. And you hear the Republican candidates for president. Amazing to hear in that party in particular, where tough on crime was the dogma. You could not be less tough on crime. He was always being out-toughed by somebody, you know. And now, you know, Chris Christie, Carly Fiorina, Jeb Bush, all those folks were mentioning, and I believe it may have quieted down a bit. I'm afraid it's maybe lost. I don't want it to be lost, but as a topic in the conversation, the presidential debate. But for a while there, it was stunning to me to see that. So I think it's kind of, we're moving in that direction that you mentioned, but very recently, last year or so.
Another question over there. The microphone, yes.
I just want to say thank you for shining light on this situation, because what used to be my stark secrets is now my story.
Welcome. You're welcome, honey. I'm very happy to do that. It was a completely unexpected thing. I did not feel that I was going to be doing. I had no idea being here like this right now. I can tell you, staying at that Days Inn in Wheelersburg, you know, because that was the only place I got cell service, man. Yeah. Oh, yes, sir.
Well, I want to make a mention that the Loved Ones group in town is free Wednesday night at 5:30? 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock.
And invaluable. Going it alone, good luck, you know. And I have a policy question. It has to do, well, Loved Ones group is free. Treatment is not. What are your suggestions? What do we need to do as a country to have treatment available, paid for, not the luck of the draw? And we're fortunate in this community that we have a number of options, but that's very unusual, and even then it's a strain. So your comments about you know, healthcare reform, that sort of thing.
One of the reasons that so many people are getting treatment now in the state of Ohio is because of the expansion of Medicaid that was done under the Kasich administration. That is a part that is a part of the Affordable Care Act. Also a part of the Affordable Care Act is a concept of parity, meaning that private health insurance needs to cover drug, alcohol, and mental health treatment the same as it does any other kind of health care problem. That is the law of the land. However, with any federal law, seeing that that law is practiced within our own state or within our own community sometimes falls to us. And we know that everywhere it has been a very slow process to get insurance companies to recognize, the equal value of addiction treatment or mental health treatment as they would for somebody who has a diabetes or a heart condition. Wayne Campbell, the gentleman that you mentioned that you met, he's over the Tyler's Light program. His son was Tyler Campbell, who died of a drug overdose. Tyler died of a drug overdose in his bedroom at his father's home the day after he was discharged from a drug and alcohol treatment program in the state of Ohio because his insurance ran out. That But again, there are families everywhere. There are families in our community that can tell exactly the same kind of story. Again, it is the law of the land, but it is not in practice. Medicaid and Medicaid expansion has created an avenue for people. What we recommend people do is don't let the worry about how to get alcohol and drug treatment paid for stop you from calling a drug and alcohol agency and asking about how to get drug treatment. Because oftentimes we assume that there's no path for that treatment when there in fact very well may be. And so that's generally my recommendation. We are in a state that, again, has been very progressive in trying to recognize this. And the reason that they have recognized this is not just out of the goodness of their hearts, but it makes sense. It makes economic sense. You know, people who do not get treatment for their chronic health care conditions cost every citizen in a community and in a state a lot of money. So if we can get that treatment provided, it's a cost savings. So again, we're in a don't let worry about treatment costs keep you from at least asking and investigating that. I also recommend that if you have someone who has a drug or alcohol problem, go ahead and investigate where they can get treatment. You need to be a treatment expert in terms of what are the resources in your community that can be available to your loved one. Because at some point in time, you will have the opportunity to direct them that way. And you need to know what those are and go ahead and talk to those people. If you have a loved one who is engaged in drug and alcohol treatment or in recovery, again, recognize that we're dealing with a chronic health problem, and for you to know as much about that problem as you would know about if they had cancer is very important. Family members are the front line of this helping someone who has an addiction. I have seen family members, and we have a number of them in this room, who have taken years off their loved one's addiction because they got information, they got help for themselves, and they started applying certain principles, and they learned how to help their loved one, and it really did work.
I've read your book. I'm not from this community. I'm upriver Marietta. We're across from West Virginia. One of the debates, and gentlemen, I think you're very open and you're very honest, and I'm not sure I have an opinion on this, but I would like your opinion on whether you think this is a good thing or bad thing. But one of the things that's got a lot of press our way is the state of West Virginia has now made it legal to sue doctors who make you an addict. And there's a debate, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know where I stand personally. Do you have any opinion on that? Is that a wise use of the law?
Our opinion on suing doctors who prescribe these pills?
It make you an addict. West
I'm
Virginia has recently done that. If you become an addict because a doctor prescribed addictive substances, you can now sue that doctor. And I don't know. Some people are saying, well, it's going to run doctors out of the state. Other people that have had these problems say, I wish we had that. I don't have an opinion. I just don't know where to stand on it.
I don't have an opinion about the suing of doctors necessarily, but I do know that there are protocols that can be practiced by primary care physicians and other specialists to be able to determine whether or not somebody that they are prescribing to is developing an addiction. The other issue that has been very difficult that we've been trying to stress is that doctors get very little education during their medical training about drug addiction, yet it probably represents 50% of what they're going to see in their office, in a hospital, in an emergency room, or in a nursing home. So that's one of the issues, that we've got this real gap in terms of a lot of doctors who are trying to determine who is it safe to prescribe these medications to. And the reality is it's not safe to prescribe to anyone. Anyone has that potential for becoming addicted. And if a doctor's not looking at that, the other thing we ran into in our community is that even doctors that were trying to do the right thing, once they determined that someone was developing an addiction, what do you think their response was? Kick them out of the practice. Now, we wouldn't do that with any other health problem. If I went to the doctor because I had asthma and they discovered I had diabetes, they would treat my diabetes. But that's exactly what happened, is that people were pushed to the street because the doctors were concerned that, well, they're dealing with an addicted person. And again, the stigma issue that Frank brought up. You know, well, this is now a bad person, this is a criminal person. So again, I think that one of the things that we have to be willing to start embracing and perhaps expecting of our medical community is that they understand the protocols in terms of how to determine when somebody is developing an addiction, but then what to do about it. Not just to say, I'm cutting you off from your drug, because that's when you're now pushing that person to the street to either buy that drug or to escalate to some other kind of opiate.
All right.
I have more to say on that.
Do you have anything else to say?
No, I don't. I'm not.
One more, okay.
Hi. As someone that has grown up in Portsmouth in this post-Dreamland era, there's kind of like a stigma of the young people that grow up here that have grown up in this addiction era about leaving this town once we grow up. Like once we graduate high school, some come to Shawnee because it's cheap and then go away to kind of prosper other communities. What's your opinion on like keeping the young here, keeping it a lively community? Either one's fine.
Well, I think that what you're seeing downtown is going some way to do that. I mean, you've got kind of these funky businesses all of a sudden. And as Lisa, I think, said, the blue-haired kids. The hipper your town becomes, the more kids will want to come here and or stay and come back. And the more, I think, your lofts and your cafe here, it's a small step, but it's like definitely in the right direction. You have a place to kind of hang out. You have the RWR, that rap group that I thought was really, really great. Whether the stigma of wanting to leave, look, young people have been leaving small towns since like, what, since forever, right? So it's really up to the folks here to provide some reason to stay. And for example, I wrote an op-ed in the paper just the other day. I haven't seen it actually. I just saw it today, as a matter of fact, that talked about how this area could be a wonderful center for research. I'm not just talking about Portsmouth. I'm talking from like Morgantown to Cincinnati and Lexington to Columbus. Could be a wonderful center for addiction research. The country, the world, desperately needs that. But right now you've got all these young, mostly young or youngish folks who are in recovery. They're going to this school, they're going to Marshall, they're going to Northern Kentucky, they're going to Miami, Ohio University rather, all these places to study, to be social workers and counselors and addiction specialists, all that kind of stuff. You know, if you push the idea that you have to find a way of channeling that. That's a lot of energy, you know. Those folks have woken up. That second chance is a marvelous, sweet, precious thing to hold on to, and people need ways of making that a reality. And here the counseling center has employed lots of them, but I think that there's we may run into a time when there's just so many of them and they all want to help, and they're going to run in, and their expectations or their ability to realize that is blunted in some way just because there isn't enough. And I think around here you've got recovering addicts, you've got active addicts, you've got all these medical centers, you've got these universities, and that is a way of, I think, retaining a lot of those kids who might actually leave. And that would be a shame. That would be a shame. It would be one more, dynamic blood leaving the area. It's very much like Mexico. Mexico loses all its immigrants. That's a catastrophic thing for Mexico. We think of the complexity and the controversy surrounding Mexican immigration here, but I can tell you it is an awful thing for Mexico to lose all those people every year. I don't care how many billions they send back. It's still a bad thing. It'd be a bad thing for here. And so maybe you have this opportunity now that maybe it's important to start talking about, of seeing about using your political force in the state and maybe the other two states, West Virginia and Kentucky, to see about bringing more dollars in. And when more dollars in, more people come, then it becomes easier to form the kind of cultures that young people want to be in a town for. That's like one option. But I mean, I'm kind of encouraged. I drive around, and every time I come back, I see another building under remodel and renovation and whatnot. I'm not sure if that was happening 10 years ago. I'm pretty sure it was not. So I think it's kind of you got some encouraging, I would say, finally, I see this town as a very encouraging thing. I know at first blush it took me aback too, but you've got a lot of things going on, a lot of problems, but a lot of things going on, and I think you need to appreciate that, not fall into the old fatalism, negativity, despair, nothing works and it's your fault, that kind of stuff, which I think kind of ruled the town for a good long time. That's not how I view the town, or came to view the town after I got to really, really know it. And so I think you'd be, if you're an artist, this is a really good place to be. I was in Detroit. If you're an artist in America and you're not making plans to move to Detroit where the rent is cheap and you could do all the great cutting-edge art you want, then maybe you're not really an artist. That's how I feel. And I feel like this town is cheap rent, man. That's where artists should be,
Sam, we certainly thank you for taking time to come and visit with us today. My name is Bob Trues, and I'm the Dean of the Library, and I'm the guy that said yes, but Janet is the staff member who did the work to put this all together. Janet, thank you so very much. If any of you have books that Sam has not yet signed, he'll be out at the table. So please stop by and visit with him, get your book signed. And again, thank you very much. And one last hand for Sam Quinones.